How we doing, guys? This is for Auto 171, Mr. Alexander's class. I apologize. I wanted to get this video out to you earlier in the week. Unfortunately, today is Tuesday. We had a little technical issue down here, so it's taken me until Tuesday to get this uploaded. But I apologize for it. You guys should have received an email from me yesterday with your assignments for the week. A couple of disassemble, reassemble videos. And a couple other things. This chapter I'm going to review today is chapter 6 in the new book. I'm not sure what it was in the red book, but this is going to be manual transmission parts and operation. This is basically an introduction to manual transmissions. At this point right now, we've covered everything I really wanted or intended to cover in automatic transmissions, and I just wanted to make sure that I got the automatic transmission stuff finished. And at this point, we're going to start on manual transmissions. One of the things I typically ask my students to do in this class at this point is to make a chart in your notebook. And I'm asking you guys to do this. Make a chart in your notebook. And on the left-hand side of the page of the chart, I want you to list components that you found in an automatic transmission. And then after reading these two chapters, I would like you to list the corresponding components or systems or service procedures you would find differently in a manual transmission. Now I'm going to give you the first one. The first one would obviously be the torque converter. So in a torque converter, that's going to be the link between the crankshaft and the input shaft of the transmission in an automatic transmission. In a manual transmission, what is the component that substitutes for that and acts like that? So you're going to make a list, 2 columns, and I'm looking for you to give me at least 10 items of various comparisons. You can look at the fluid, you can look at the service procedure. Does it utilize a hydraulic pump? What type of gearing are used? Those types of things. So basically, you're going to list 2 columns of 10, at least 10, and then from those, you're going to go ahead and provide me with the differences between the two. I've actually had students in the past list the number of pedals that are inside the car, but the idea is just kind of get you an idea of what the differences are between the manual transmission and the automatic transmission. So pretty basic stuff, but if you guys can put that together, that would be great. All right, starting out in this manual transmission, obviously you have the key components. Make sure you know what all of these key components are, the key terms. If you don't list them, define them. Make sure they're in your notebook, because again, you can use your notebook on your final exam, and I'm sure some of the stuff will appear on that. Basic layout of a manual transmission. Now, you'll notice there's 2 chapters. One was a manual transmission chapter. The other one was a manual transaxle. So the first chapter talks about the manual transmission, and there really is a difference. A manual transmission basically has an input shaft in line with the output shaft. So power is going to transfer straight through the assembly through using the same center line. In a transaxle, the power may actually be delivered to an offset shaft that drives a differential. So in a transaxle, the final drive ratio, the final drive differential will be inside the same box. So that's why they call it a transaxle. The operation is slightly different, but it is very, very similar in the way it functions. So in this particular case, obviously, you have your input shaft, you have your input gear driving assembly, and then as you go through here, you'll notice that all the gears are constantly meshed. So in a helical gear situation, like this type of helical gear, the helical gears will be constantly meshed all the time. So if you hear the term, I have a constantly meshed helical gear manual transmission, that means these gears are splined to the corresponding gears all the time. What is actually happening in a manual transmission or transaxle is we're linking a hub, which is attached to either a driving or a driven shaft. So this is either attached to the output shaft or to the input shaft. We're linking this hub to this particular speed gear. This speed gear assembly is actually found on the shaft. There's usually a bearing underneath it, and this speed gear will actually freely rotate and will not transfer power. So if you see 2 gears splined together and you turn the input shaft, you see them spinning, it's really not transferring power until I link this gear to the shaft that's underneath it, riding on this particular underneath this gear. That's done with this hub assembly. So this hub assembly is going to sit right about here. And what we're going to utilize, utilize this device right here, is called a sleeve. This sleeve will spline into the hub and will slide over and eventually link itself to the particular gear or the corresponding gear. Obviously, this isn't the same gear for the sub, but this would slide over and lock onto these teeth. So the sleeve will transfer power from these teeth on the speed gear through the sleeve. The sleeve is splined to the hub is splined to the shaft that's underneath it, and it will eventually transfer power. So in a manual transmission, these are the parts that are very critical. Speed gear, hub, and sleeve. Now, one of the things you'll find in a manual transmission that's very, very kind of complicated to understand, but in a manual transmission, this guy and this guy could be turning at different speeds when you attempt to shift. So when you slide this over to shift it, these teeth and these teeth could be at significant different speeds. So what we're going to use a device called a blocker ring, and that's what this is called. The blocker ring will actually spline on, or not spline on, will slide over the speed gear. It'll actually slide over this. And actually, I actually have the one that actually works on this guy. So this will actually spline over this, okay? So you got to remember, this is setting right here in the hub. Okay, let me turn this so it's locked in. Setting it right here in the hub. And when the sleeve slides over, the first thing happens is this is actually this cone, or this blocker ring is pushed against this taper surface of the speed gear. So what this does is it either starts to spin up the speed gear or slow down the speed gear, depending if you're upshifting or downshifting. And what that does is it actually links the speed. It actually clocks the speed. What it does is through the tapered cone, no mechanical other than the tapered cone, this actually pushes on or pulls on this speed gear to either slow it down or speed it up and make this spin at the same speed as the sleeve. So the idea is if we're going to spin these at the same speed, now this will actually slide over without having what they call clash. Clash is when these two guys come up against each other at different speeds. It causes a grinding situation, and you'll have clash. So if you ever rode with somebody that really doesn't know how to drive manual transmission, or maybe they're not fully disengaging the clutch, or they're just kind of pushing the shifter around, what they'll do in a lot of cases is you'll hear gears grinding, and everybody says, oh, you're grinding your gears. You're not physically grinding this part of the gear. What you're doing is grinding these teeth against the sleeve. Okay, so the job of this guy right here is to speed up or slow down the speed gear. This is called the synchronizer assembly, or this is called the blocker ring. Okay, the whole system is called the synchronizer assembly, but this is called the blocker ring. Sometimes people call this a synchro, but this is the wear surface. This area right here is actually going to wear off as you shift or drive your manual transmission. This is actually going to be the sacrificial surface. That's that guy right there. Okay, so when you're in neutral, the sleeves will all be centered, and none of them will be engaged in the speed gear. Once you put the vehicle in gear, you're simply going to slide this over, synchronize the speed, allow the sleeve to engage in the speed gear, and you're going to transfer power. That's how a manual transmission or transaxle works. It's been working that way for a long time. Works great. It's an awesome deal. The only problem we run into is when this guy wears off, you can actually see there's some friction material in here. Now, some of these are just metallic. There's no friction material at all. It's just kind of a tapered cone, and they put little slots in there. But some of them actually have friction material like you'd see in an automatic transmission. So again, specific fluid is really important. So what happens is as you drive the vehicle and you shift, this is obviously constantly rubbing the upshift or downshift. And as that rubs over time, this material wears off, and this no longer synchronizes correctly, and then the sleeve could come out and actually come into contact this, and you end up with a clashing situation. The term for this, another thing I need you to understand about this, and this is kind of a little difficult thing to understand, but this shifts back and forth. See how this slides back and forth in the sleeve or in the hub? Okay, so in the hub, this is allowed to clock back and forth. If we're in a situation where this guy is not, this gear is in too different of a speed than this. Now it's kind of difficult to understand, but let's say you're traveling down the road 60 miles an hour and you grab your shifter and you try to pull it in first gear. There's going to be too much of a differential in speed between this and this to safely engage a shift. So what's going to happen is this ring, called the blocker ring, will push slightly out of place, and you can actually see the teeth are no longer aligned, and what that does is it blocks the sleeve from sliding out. So you try to slide the sleeve over, you're going to come up against some resistance, and you're not going to be able to get that in gear. Once you get into a situation where the speed match between the two gears are close enough, or between the hub in the gear is speed gear is close enough, this will slide out of the way, allowing the sleeve to move over. Okay, this is actually called clocking. Okay, so we're going to clock this, and this is going to keep this guy from coming into this guy too fast. That's why this is referred to as a blocker ring assembly. It actually blocks the shift. If you've ever driven a manual transmission and tried to downshift too early, you'll notice that the shifter actually won't allow you to come down. That's called a blocking assembly. Okay, but there you go. So you got your hub, your sleeve, your blocker ring, and your speed gear. All of these have to be working together to make our manual transmission shift correctly. And obviously the person driving the car needs to know what the hell they're doing too. But that's those are the parts of a manual transmission basically. So coming in through here, again, you're going to have a straight through. This guy right here is considered the counter shaft. This is the shaft that's kind of countering that main shaft. You need to understand also that your input shaft typically on a manual transmission, this input shaft stops right here, okay? So this gear is always turning. This particular gear is always turning at input shaft speed. This gear also is cast to this. So these two are always turning at input shaft speed. As you go through here, you can obviously see how we engage and disengage the particular gears as you run through. So in this particular case, this is third gear. So if I slide the sleeve over, third gear power is actually going to come in across here through these two cast iron gears into this guy. And remember, this sleeve is splined to a hub, which is splined to this output shaft, and power transfers all the way across there and out the back of that transmission. So again, there's probably a better definition as you go through this book, but I needed to give you that kind of information as you move through. So okay, so again, counter shaft, center line, and main shaft. And again, this is unique to a manual transmission. This is actually a flanged for a four-wheel drive vehicle, but that's basically what you're looking at there. Synchronizer parts, we talked about those. Power transfer, you guys already understand ratio. Reverse idler gear. Now, this is something you need to understand about a reverse idler gear. Reverse idler gear is used in reverse basically to change the direction of the output shaft so the vehicle can back up. Okay, in all other conditions, the counter shaft is allowing for the rotation of the input shaft and the output shaft to match in the same rotation. That's what one of the other purposes of these gears are. Okay, so again, that's your manual transmission. You guys already read this section, so kind of repeating stuff. All right, shifter parts. I'm going to get into this in a second. I'm going to stop the video now. We're at about 13 minutes. I don't want to run too long. Don't want to lose it, so I'm going to go ahead and upload this, and then I'll pick up here in the next video.